So you're taking particular out?
Yeah.
Okay, but you're not changing the pH or?
I actually changed the pH. I actually got put stuff and changed the pH.
Okay.
Like drops.
All right, I'm amplified now. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our October meeting. We've got a lot going on tonight. It'll be a pretty interesting meeting, I think. So let's get started. If you are new, this is one of your first few meetings. Stand up, introduce yourself so we know who you are. That's Pat. Where are you from, Pat?
Originally from Ohio.
Yeah.
I've moved down to the Cincinnati area only about a year, and I love Cincinnati. And flowers, landscaping, that was my passion. And this is my first meeting, and I might think no, might not, but it was very interesting last, when Bella was from Louisiana, I was intrigued. And going in when I saw that was so good. I figured life is short.
Right.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
I recognize a couple of people from the beginners classes recently, so if you're pretty new, just stand up and tell everyone who you are and where you're from. And
I'm Eric Wigert, and I'm from here. And I took the beginner's class in the March and unfortunately few meetings, so just not lately that's it for that in out of town.
yeah, how's your ficus doing?
It's doing well.
Yeah.
I was just talking to Joanne, if we wanted to bring her back, I just brought everything in. This is the cold.
Right.
Mostly tropical and
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad your tree's doing well. Mine from then is looking pretty good as well, so I might do a quick video on how to trim it up. I did one for the most recent, or the June class, so I'll do one for that one as well.
I went to the beginner's class a few weeks ago, and the program really enjoyed both. And was my support for the beginner's class, so she would be around the room. Everybody was just nice.
Excellent. Welcome. It's good to see you again after the class.
John Morris, I'm from Lebanon, and I joined because I knew with my life, and so I needed to get out. I came to beginner's class. My tree is in good shape.
Excellent. Glad to hear that.
And I went to the Chrome, and then tonight was really impressive with 7 trees, and he was showing me on the slides one eating and this is my first meeting.
Well, welcome. Nice of you to be here. I remember you saying that you had driven down from Lebanon at the show. So, yeah, welcome. Anyone else?
First meeting.
Excellent. Well, good to see you again. All right. As you've probably heard, we just had our fall show at the Crone, which was our 60th anniversary show, so it was pretty fantastic, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated, who had trees, who volunteered their time, who came to watch the demo. We couldn't do it without you, our volunteers and members, so thank you. The Education Committee is forming. We're going to have our first meeting in November on the 7th. It'll be a Teams meeting, and I will send out invites. So if you are interested in becoming part of the Education Committee and helping shape programs and things that we're going to do in the future for the club, please attend the meeting. We'd love to have you. I would love to have you since I'm the committee chair. The mentorship program kind of goes hand in hand with the learning So we're also looking for mentors. I had a couple people get in touch that they would like to be mentors. These will be folks who will work with the newer club members and answer questions and be available to help them with anything that they might need related to bonsai. So if you would like to be a mentor, please get in touch with me and let me know, and also attend the meeting coming up on the 7th. It'd be great. We do still have the survey out there. I think at this point only 9 people have taken the survey, so if you haven't taken it and you got your phones with you, scan the QR code, take the survey. Ben, you said you were going to do it, right? Okay. Oh, David said he was going to do it. All right.
Did you do it?
Did I do it? I wrote the survey. And yes, I did take the survey. I was the first person to take it. I had to make sure it worked. November 1st, that's the first Saturday of the month. So we will meet. Yes?
November 2nd is when the new Chrome show starts.
Okay.
So, and that's the holiday show, and they'll have the trains and everything else. So if you come first Saturday, then you will be able to see the holiday show.
Yeah, so first Saturday is great because we all meet, a bunch of us meet at the Crone. We bring some trees to work on. We hang out, we chat about bonsai, we get advice from each other on whatever materials we brought, and it's a pretty good time. It's 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on the first Saturday of each month, pending show changes. So if there are any changes to that schedule, we'll email them out. But you can sign up online, or you can just show up.
I would prefer you sign up online so you know how many tables to set up.
Yeah. Joanne would prefer if you signed up online. You can find it under the volunteer section of the website. Next month's meeting will be a bring your own tree meeting with Mark Fields, and he is going to be here. What's he going to be talking about?
So we have two club trees that have been at some nurseries for an extended period of time. Our goal is as a group to discuss and then decide what direction to take those trees in, and hopefully at the end of a number of years, get them into the next exhibition.
Yeah. So we have a couple of big trees to work on. We have a really big Japanese black pine that Chris has been looking after for us, and he's after us to get it off his property so he doesn't have to mess with it anymore. And then we also have a really big trident maple that's got a whole lot of deadwood and multiple trunks, and it's just massive, and it's going to be really cool if we can do a bunch of carving on it and make something interesting out of it. So we're going to continuously, these trees are going to be like our pet trees, and so we're, over the course of the next couple of years, we're going to continuously work on them and hopefully get them into a shape to put them in a show.
Most importantly, learn from the artists on what direction they may or may not take us in those trees, and it will not be the same artist every time. That's the trick.
Yes, yes. Judy just said she wants to be on the committee. No?
That's one of those things that, I don't know if you like going to the barber every time you do that.
Well, you know, you maybe the barber sees something in your hair that you're missing. We'll find out. We're going to find out. It's going to be an experience. It'll be fun. So.
The objective is to learn. If you can get it to a show, great.
Yes. Oh, and I forgot to capitalize Crone. The holiday party is coming up on December 7th at the Crone. We initially had some issues because the Crone has changed over to a new catering system. You can't just bring in whoever you want like we did in the past. We were being forced to use their catering manager. We did, however, secure a catering company to do that is approved by the Crone to help keep our costs down. However, our cost has still risen a fair amount since last year. So the tickets are $20 by about 35%. So, and that's even with, we're getting the alcohol and the bartender donated. That's even with that being donated. So The tickets are going to be $20 for adults. Kids greater than or equal to 12 are free. So bring your family. It's going to be a fun time. We're going to do something, a couple things a little bit differently this year. We're going to have some team bonsai games that include styling trees as a team and auctioning them off at the end of the night. So that's going to be kind of fun. Steve's ready to be a team leader.
We're all free, right?
Yeah.
You said greater than equally, well, it's free.
I said, well, sorry, less than or equal to 12 is free. Less than or equal to 12 is free.
False advertising.
Yeah. So it's going to be, yeah. Do you want to eat off the kids' menu? But you only get the kids' portion. So anyway, so it's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to do these trees. They're going to be done as a group. So there will be teams of 3 people, and everybody gets about 15 minutes to work on their tree, and then they switch to another person to style the tree through the team. And then at the end of an hour, we're going to raffle the trees off. Yes, at the holiday party.
What kind of trees could it be?
I don't know. Haven't decided yet. Yeah, this is going to be in addition to that. So, something a little bit more exciting. I can tell that you're interested. You want to style a tree at the party, or part of a tree. It's going to be an auction. So bring your wallet, Steve. All right, so now let me introduce Mike Lane. He's going to be doing a program on not literati bonsai, on Shohin. And so Mike is here from Florida. I understand that he got his power back about 5 days ago after the hurricane. He worked for Wigert's Bonsai and was training under Eric for a number of years. He still lives in Cape Coral, and he has a bonsai nursery down there. He's got, I think it's Kitsune Bonsai is his nursery down there. He is well known on YouTube. He's traveled internationally doing demos and programs, and he's just an all-around great guy, I think.
Yeah,
So welcome. All right, we're going to take a sec to get him hooked up here.
Mike, I'm gonna hit that. It'll go back into here, and then the other little clicker thing.
And there are still seats available for Mike's workshop on Saturday. There's seats available for the workshop on Saturday. So please visit online to register. The cost is $99 and it includes 3 trees. Mike also recommends that you bring your own trees as well to work on. Do you have HDMI?
I do, yeah.
Or is it on here somewhere?
It's
I'm
on the
not
other
seeing it.
side, sorry, it's right there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, there it is, boom. It should come up. There it is. All right. Oh, yeah, let me just back out. We're gonna do the other one first. We're gonna do this one today. Where is it? Here it is. Slide sheet.
Just hit F5.
Oh, no, yeah, I'm pretty computer illiterate. So now we just got, oh, we already got that plugged in.
Yep.
So now,
I'll give you this.
there it is, okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. So forward, reverse, and you can even use the pointer.
Oh, awesome. Great. Thank you, man. All right. Well, thank you for having me, guys. It's been very nice to escape the heat from Florida, although from what I understand today was like the first nice day in Florida, so it would have been nice either way. But happy to be up here. I appreciate the introduction as well. Today we're discussing something that is a personal passion of mine, is Shohin Bonsai. So I'm primarily known for doing tropicals, things like that, but really my primary passion in bonsai has always been Shohin. And I started that love pretty early on after getting my first few bonsai. I did go through the big tree phase and everything like that, but very quickly kind of found why Shohin really is appealing. So we're going to talk about kind of the culture that is Shohin, because it is a different culture. It's like a subculture of bonsai. So we're going to talk about some of the rules, some of the pros and cons, and then some of the ways to build the Shohin bonsai. Okay? We'll also talk about the pottery and briefly a little bit about how they're displayed. So it's a lot to go over, but it will give you kind of a crash course on the culture. So does anybody have any questions on kind of my background or anything before we get started? Okay. Well, I used to do kendo and iaido, which were Japanese martial arts. They're Japanese fencing. And so you're learning to use the sword and whatnot. And I did that for many years, really loved it, and loved how kind of disciplined Japanese arts are. I'm not usually a disciplined guy. I'm very scatterbrained. It's hard for me to kind of find my focus. And so Japanese arts really appeal to me because they will grind you into doing the right thing. And so I really enjoyed doing that, and there came a point in time I couldn't do it anymore. And so a few years went by, and I had like a big hole in my life, and then somebody gave me a bonsai, and it was like, aha, I can get back into that training again, and that discipline, and that was something that really appealed to me. So that's why I kind of got back into it, but it was really going out to Wigert's and seeing his place for the first time, and I realized you can make a living doing this, and I said, you know what, I think this is my path. So, but good question. So we'll just dive right in. So what is Shohin? Shohin, the word, is just the Japanese word for tiny thing. Typically, trees are under 8 inches tall, okay? Some are 10 inches tall, bunjin and whatnot, but usually it's about 8 inches tall. And there's a reason for this, is if you think about the typical Japanese display area, we'll wait till he goes by. A typical Japanese display area is 72 inches, or about the length of a tatami mat. A tatami mat is what, in traditional Japanese homes, they lay on the floor. So they're those bamboo mats. And so a display area for big trees, little trees, everything gets 72 inches. So think with Shohin bonsai, you can only really go to a certain size height in the way that they're displayed. If you go any higher, you see the cabinet that's behind there. If we go any higher than 8 inches, it won't fit in the cabinet, and the cabinet can only be so big. So there is a cutoff. There is not, however, a too small. You can go as small as you like. Mame is a form of Shohin, and that's all Shohin under 4 inches, and even goes under that to Shito and so on and so forth. But you can make trees. I've made trees that are probably 2 inches tall, that are 3 or 4 years old, still going. Shohin and Mame are more about feel than the actual size constraints. So trees should actually fit easily in one hand. So I've seen Eric, my teacher, design trees that are 8 inches tall, but they're also 10 inches wide. And so when you have to carry a tree with 2 hands, even if it's 8 inches tall, that's not a Shohin. It should feel, easy. It should fit easy in one hand. In Japan, and likely up here, Shohin will focus more on seasonal beauty. So you guys are lucky that you get seasons. In Florida, we don't really get a true season, and so it's hard for us. We don't get a reliable bloom or reliable fruit on anything. It's all about like whenever it gets fertilized, whenever it happens to happen. So trying to set up a show surrounding, you know, a certain bloom is impossible. So you guys are lucky you do have seasons, and in Japan, they kind of set up shows in relation to what's going to be in bloom, what's going to be in fruit, et cetera, et cetera. We also focus on things that represent transient beauty. So shedding of leaves, we'll show defoliated trees, we'll show trees with fall color, you know, just like traditional bonsai. We show the bonsai in all states. Shohin are freer and more abstract than larger bonsai, but a natural feeling is still important. So I'm going to reiterate it a few times throughout the PowerPoint, but there are several differences in branch placement and branch decision that we might not make on larger trees. You're only working with something this tall, so you don't have a lot of say to be like, oh, that's not the perfect spot, I'm going to cut it off and wait for the next one. You might not get one in that little area you need, so a lot of times you have to make compromises. So we'll get through the boring stuff. Well, not the boring, I don't think it's boring, but we'll get through the didactic stuff and get into the more exciting stuff here. So a little history of Shohin. As we know, mention of potted trees in China dates back to at least 206 BC. These potted trees made their way to Japan somewhere between 1180 and 1333 AD, and thus that's when bonsai was born in Japan. Though the art of Shohin bonsai dates back roughly 150 years, popular interest in Shohin didn't begin until the 1960s. So Shohin, realistically, Shohin has only been practiced for about 150 years, whereas bonsai has been practiced way longer than that. And of that 150 years, it's only really been getting popular in the 1960s. This is when it really started taking off. And then in the 1970s, it made its way to the West, and nowadays, it's very, very popular, and there are nurseries that dedicate just to Shohin. You know, there are shows that are dedicated just to Shohin. And so like I said, it has its own culture. Okay, so this is the guy we have to thank for it, Count Yorinaga Matsudaira. He's considered the patriarch or the father of modern Shohin. Now look at his Shohin that were shown in the 30s. In 1934, Kokufu Bonsai Association opened its doors. Who in here knows or has ever heard of the term Kokufuten? Few people. All right, cool. So Kokufuten is Japan's premier show for bonsai. So it's the end-all, be-all show. It's held every single year, and it's where the best of the best of the best bonsai are decided. And so think this was the very first Kokufu ever held, the very first one of these events, so it's a big deal. And Count Yorinaga, instead of showing a large tree, decided to show these teeny little trees that you're seeing here. So that was kind of the turning point. That was when the first kind of inkling of Shohin popularity. His bonsai were then displayed annually until his death in 1944, and inspired other collectors, soon formed the Zenkoku Shohin Bonsai Kumie, and named their exhibition the Nihon Shohin Bonsai Meihenten. So essentially, they just came up with their own organization and made their own show. And so their show turned into this. So after the 11th exhibition, All Japan Shohin Bonsai Association was appointed to organize the exhibition, all others onward. The show is called Gafuten. So we have Kokufuten for the big trees and for all trees, basically. Then that's the number1 show. But then for Shohin, the number1 show is Gafuten. And Gafuten is where this aesthetic has now become prevalent. So if you look back, look at the difference in the proportions of the trees. You could argue that we've learned quite a bit in that, 50 years. So now the horticulture and the proportions, oh yeah, I keep forgetting I have a pointer here. There we go. I'll just point. So the proportions you can see is more of a 6-to-1 taper ratio than kind of the other trees that are a lot thinner and more elegant. These are a lot thicker, stronger taper ratios, much chunkier. All right. There's Count Yorinaga sitting in his tea house with lots of his little mame and Shohin. And again, it's a blurry photo, but you can see just how many Shohin and mame he has to take care of. That's always been kind of the dream behind being a Shohin collector for me, or a mame collector, is this scene right here, is the sea of green. So what are the pros and cons? I would say that, we'll start with the pros. They take up less space, that's the obvious one. But that's something that needs to be talked about because that can make or break your adventure into bonsai. So if you're new into bonsai, taking up space can really be a big deal. You might have one tree where you get to repot once every 2 years, maybe 3 years, or you have a bunch of trees where you're repotting much more frequently. You might have one species with one tree and you're just learning that horticulture, whereas you might have 12 different trees that you have to learn the horticulture. By branching out and doing Shohin, you're learning a lot faster, I would argue, as far as the diversity that you'll need to learn in the hobby. They're easier to move and transport, that's a given. So that's why we all will end up doing Shohin eventually. You know, is eventually, at least in Florida, is every time we get cold, you have to take the trees inside, and then as soon as it warms out, you put them back outside. And so it's this in and out, in and out, in and out thing in the winter that everybody hates. And so everybody is slowly gravitating towards Shohin more and more. This is the big one though. Development is faster. And I don't just mean like, okay, yeah, you prune it into a ball and development is faster. But one of the things that I've always been a big proponent of is not cutting any corners in the art. Like doing the legitimate Japanese work. And I'm also impatient. I'm also a human being. And so if I were to do some of the work that I do on Shohin to a larger tree, it would take me 20, 30 years to get the results. So here with Shohin, I can get results and payoff in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years sometimes, but within a reasonable amount of time, and I still feel like that's, in bonsai terms, that's impatient, you know? So I really like that I don't have to cut any corners and I'm still able to see progression very quickly. Younger material may be used convincingly. This is also awesome. I use a lot of cuttings, I use a lot of air layers, I use a lot of really young material that's A, it's cheaper, and B, it's much more available. So I can root it myself. You know, I do a lot of, like I said, cuttings and stuff like that to make really great Shohin, and you make them look like much older trees. They're less apt to be overwatered, so that's a given as well. But on the flip side, you're going to have to keep these things wet, maybe water twice a day in the heat of the growing season. So there are times where certain trees I've had to water 3 times a day. Those trees get sold. So cons. This is a big one, is Shohin will always lack the impact of larger trees. Always. So there's a reason why we show that big cabinet full of Shohin. Is that there's no way, if you showed one little tree next to, at like nationals, you showed one little tree next to a very large tree, it just gets swallowed up in the mix, even if it's a great tree. Because a Shohin requires that you cannot be a passive observer. A large tree, I can stand back here and just look at it and be like, ah, that's a really nice tree, I like that a lot. But a Shohin, I have to get down, or I have to pick it up, and I have to really look at it to see the structure and the value of it. And so it's not something that your neighbors are going to see from across the yard and say, oh my God, what is that tree? It lacks the impact. It always will. It's, but for those of us that are in it for kind of the technical aspect of growing the trees, it's very, very fun, very rewarding. Special horticultural considerations. That's big words for saying they're a pain in the butt. So you're going to have to just constantly baby these things. The smallest difference, you know, you put too much fertilizer on them. It's a bigger difference than if they're in a small, larger pot. You know, if you forget to water them one day, that's a big deal for a Shohin bonsai. Big deal. So they're very, very, like I said, much more delicate and unforgiving. If you guys don't have palm trees, but if a limb, an oak limb or something falls on a Shohin, that can ruin the pot, that can ruin the trunk, that can ruin everything. Whereas a large, robust tree, you might lose some twigging and some branching, but largely the tree will be fine. So it's a big difference there as well. Bless you. Less room for error. So as we were saying before, is you won't have the luxury. I often tell people, on a tree this big, where you can't have any branches for the first third, or you're trying not to have any branches for the first third, how much space do you really have to build the middle of the tree? You have that much to get all your branches that you need. So you really don't have the luxury of being too picky. And that's the next point. So we're almost through the boring stuff, and then we'll get into some fun stuff. So suitable material for Shohin. Air layers, cuttings, small, young, nursery stock, larger trees that may lack taper or interest higher in the tree, species with small leaves. These are all suitable. But I really want to focus on cuttings. One thing that I really have realized in recent years is we're always so quick to go buy material, and we always go for the fattest trunk we find. Like we go and we're like, oh, I want to save time. I don't want to wait this long to get it fat, blah, 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 blah. But then when you buy material, what's the first thing you do? As long as it's healthy and it's ready to go and it's the right time of year, what's the first thing you do to it when you're excited? Chop it up. Why? What are you chopping away? What are you chopping away? We're chopping away flaws. But those are flaws that, did those flaws ever even have to grow on the tree in the first place? If we were there all along, did we ever need to grow those flaws? No. So who's really going to move faster? While the one person who cuts all that stuff away is still trying to heal wounds and still fix scars and things like that, the person with the cutting who never grew any of that stuff, never made the mistakes, is moving all along the whole time, just chipping away. It's a tortoise beats the hare scenario to a better quality tree. I promise. So cuttings are my favorite way to go. Obviously, we want species that ramify well with fine branching and twigging. You don't want to try to use something that's very, very coarse. Save that for larger trees. Species that exhibit seasonal color, fruit, and flowers are very important. So honestly, when we get into the display portion of this, we're going to talk about how every tree in the display has to be different. It has to be very different because you're trying to build a collection of interests. And you don't want it to be too repetitive. You don't want to see the same tree over and over and over. You don't want to see the same, even similar tree over and over and over and over and over. You don't want to see the same pot over and over and over. So we don't want a lot of repetition. And so species that show seasonal color and go through changes throughout the year are very valuable for display. You see what I mean? Is you'll be able to use them differently depending on what time of the year you're in. And so this is what I meant by saying trees that lack interest higher up in the tree. So this isn't the same tree, but we do this so frequently that I couldn't find the before pic for him, so I just pulled one from the nursery. But the theory is the same. Is this tree is bigger than this tree, but this tree is of better quality than this tree. The size of bonsai means nothing, absolutely nothing. For quality, it means nothing. Now, you couldn't give me this tree, honestly, in the way it is. If you told me I couldn't cut it and you said, this is my baby, please take care of it, I would have to decline. Because it lacks any interest above this point. And whether you like the S-shaped movement or not, you have to see that this is not the same story that built this trunk down here, up here. And so it's an inconsistency that doesn't tell the same story. Whatever grew the bottom of the trunk didn't grow the top. And it's also straight and non-tapering. So it has no interest. There's no visual interest to that. So our job is to create better visual interest via taper or movement and make a better tree, be it small or large or whatever. The size of the tree shouldn't matter. The work is the work to make a better tree. You know, it has to taper, it has to move. So, to be interesting, or else it's just a straight line. So this is more for like the beginners in here, but who in here has ever heard of the rule of threes? Yeah, okay, a lot of us. This is an old John Naka thing. And it's very, very important in understanding kind of bonsai design and even bonsai culture in Shohin, because this is used all the time. All it is to sum it up, no branches for the first third, left, right, and back, nothing to the front for the middle third, and then branches now growing to the left, right, back, and front to the top. Oh, sorry. So that's it. So we're just basically building branches 360 here. We're leaving a window open to the front here, and no branches here. And the only reason we leave a window open to the front here is why choose a front if you're not going to see it? Right? Makes no sense. So we put no primary branches to the front for the middle third. So here's where we get into some progressions. So this was back in 2012. I started doing bonsai in 2008. So this wasn't long into my bonsai career when I started doing this tree. But it was my first like really successful good Shohin. So I took a lot of progression pics and kind of have kept it in the PowerPoint for a long time. I bought it for 150 bucks, and the first thing I did to it, this was a big tree, tall tree, and the first thing I did to it was cut it to that. And so obviously it's a tropical, and so we can do that. You can't do this with every tree, but seeing how cutting aggressively on the first step is unfortunately something you have to do in Shohin. If you want it to be a certain size, you can't will it underneath 8 inches. You have to cut it and rebuild it to 8 inches. It's never going to work itself down smaller. Okay, so you have to kind of work below 8 inches and work your way up. So I cut everything off to make taper and make interest in the tree, and I cut it back and left 2 branches. That was it. Now you can already see buds are starting to form on the outside of these wounds. And so those are going to be my future branches that I build from. Luckily with tropicals, and with a lot of our broadleaves, with a lot of elms, elaeagnus, not boxwood, but elm, elaeagnus, crepe myrtle, all of those can be cut just as hard as this. So you can see in just a few months from cutting that back, in 2 months, I've recovered a lot of growth from what I've cut off. So I cut off a large portion of the trunk. It's super, super scary. Oh my God, what did I do? He just said he spent $150 on that. Well, now it's growing back in 2 months. And now what my job is to do, this is what you should start taking away from this, is as it sprouts out, my job is not to cut anything yet, but just to go in and thin things down to 1 or 2 branches per area. That's it. So each area that's sprouting out like a chia pet, you'll see this on elms, you'll see this on a lot of, especially sageu elms. You can't let them cluster in there like that. One of the main things we're going to talk about is our branch pattern is building to the rule of 2s, or building everything 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 and never having any 3s or any clusters. Shoot, I don't have my tools. Not building any clusters in the branches. Those clusters lead to reverse taper, and if I were to leave this big just whirl to develop out into a pad, that will lead to a problem down the road. So I thin it down to 1 or 2 branches per area, and that's it. That's all I do for the next 2 months. And then in June is when I finally have enough elongation of the said branches to wire everything out and start pruning it into the design. So what I started doing was silhouette pruning, also known as hedge pruning. And so this is a big, quote-unquote, no-no in kind of advanced bonsai, and we'll talk about why it is. But it does create a dense canopy quickly. And so when you're first learning, it's a helpful tool, shape pruning, to kind of just get the idea of what a bonsai is and to fill it in quickly. And a lot of really great trees have been made by hedge pruning. They've just been fixed after they've been hedge pruned. So let me just make sure we get into it. Oh, we don't get into it in this one. Okay, so what is the problem with hedge pruning? One of the problems is that when I hedge prune, go to this next slide, is if you look at the angle of the cut, I'm cutting tight to the canopy here, right? So I'm extending from the trunk maybe 1 or 2 inches max from this point. But as I extend down the canopy, now I'm extending out 4 to 5 inches from the trunk, which means my ramification that's supposed to go 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 now goes 1 to 2 to 4, and that's all I get. And so that's poor ramification for your first branch. Your first branch is supposed to be your most powerful, most dynamic branch, and this is boring. Boring. The other downside of this is that through repeated prunings like this, what is the strongest part of the tree? The top or here? The top, right? So if this is stronger than this, and I prune this at the same time I prune this, are they going to come back at the same speed? No, this one's going to come back slower, right? So what's going to happen if I keep doing that over and over and over? This guy keeps coming back fine. This guy keeps coming back slower a little bit. Now fast forward 2 years. Well, now you're losing this branch. That branch is going to wither away because eventually it's going to get too weak after 2 years of doing this, and you're going to lose that branch, and you're not going to know why. You're going to say, I don't know why I lost it. It got weak, and I lost that first branch, but no big deal. I have this branch. And then you're going to keep doing this, and then 2 years later, this is going to wither away. And you'll say, you know what? No big deal. I now have this branch. And you're just going to keep going with it until somebody comes along and tells you this is why this is happening. So the reality is that branches have to be treated based on how strong they are at all times. At all times. So the key to bonsai, real bonsai, is to balance all the branches first and then go through and prune everything. Go through and make sure that you're treating everything equally. Because otherwise you'll get vigor disparities. And so it's not uncommon for me when I'm building a tree to have this long and this cut in short because I need to divide this out properly, or vice versa. It's not always going to be a perfect triangle when you're building it until it's balanced. Until you get that sucker perfectly balanced, it's going to be very hard to do that. So February 2013, so 1 year later about, is when I decide to go ahead and start repotting the tree, which is a terrible time to repot any tree, any tropical. But we have a nasty habit in Florida where in February we get this warm spell. And for the last 16 years that I've been doing bonsai, I tell myself, I'm like, don't get tricked by the warm spell. Don't get tricked. And seriously, every year I start repotting trees in February because I'm like, man, we're not going to get cold again. It's like 90 degrees outside. We can't get cold now. And then we're freezing cold again in March. And I'm like, what happened? So anyway, you get through it, you limp the trees by, and so sometimes we can repot. So this one was repotted into a nice Japanese container the first time I ever did it. And over time, it still became a great tree. But there's a lot of flaws to this tree that you're not seeing. There's a lot of open wounds. Those wounds that I showed you in the beginning are still open. They haven't budged at all. They haven't closed. And on a high, like Japanese level of bonsai, that's poor quality. It's poor. So that's something that I can now, knowing what I know now, I can do better. So that's something that I could have done. So some things I would have done differently. There was no rush to reach a finished bonsai container. Painters don't frame their paintings before they paint them. So there was no reason for me to hurry up and wait, oh my God, I got my shape, I got to put it in a bonsai pot. There's no point to that. You know, it's when you think of it as the pot is like a frame for your masterpiece. It's like, hey, I've put 4 years of work in this. Let's go buy a good pot and let's really frame this properly. So another thing, I should have used cut paste. You guys notice on those wounds I didn't put any cut paste. Cut paste is super important. Open wounds or pruning scars can potentially affect the longevity of the tree. So the reality is, why are wounds so important? We're going to talk about this when we have our next program tomorrow, I believe it is, Saturday. So when we have our next program Saturday, we're going to talk about how to close wounds. But why are they so important? Why am I harping on about wounds so much? Sure, there are going to be trees like junipers and deadwood trees that have them, and some trees look cool with wounds. But ultimately, if you were a Japanese investor and I had two Japanese maples, and I said, okay, you have 20 grand to go buy a Japanese maple for our hotel lobby, that we want it to be awesome, but we don't want to lose our investment. And you had one 20 grand maple with a big wound and one with no wound. The one with no wound is the safer investment. It's a safer investment. So it's worth the money. So you will always see trees that have no wounds being worth more money. They will always sell for more money. And that's because there's longevity there. That tree's going to last. It's not going to have insect issues. It's not going to have any of the issues that trees with wounds have. So I now I grow everything in the rule of twos to build my tree and tend to use the semi-clip and grow technique. So branches and trunks are grown to a desired diameter and then cut. And as the tree buds back, 2 branches or buds are selected. We're going to get into this on Friday, like in depth. But 2 branches or buds are selected between them. So I make my cut. I select 2 branches on opposite sides of the wound. Have to have branches on opposite sides of the wound because you're now going to heal half the wound with one branch and half the wound with the other. Part of the reason why we never get anywhere with wound healing is that we spend a lot of time trying to heal wounds with one branch. And unfortunately, on a lot of trees, to heal the wound with one branch, you have to regrow the exact same thing you just cut off. So you made no progress. So you have to divide it. The two branches are then grown until the wound is nearly or completely closed, then they too are cut. So 1 to 2 to 4 to 8. So we're going 1, cut, heal that, 2, cut, heal those 2 wounds that are now smaller, then heal 4 wounds that are even smaller, then 8, and then it's gone. No more wounds. Make sense? Kind of tracks. Oh, I do have it. Look at that. So this is essentially it. We cut and we're looking for these 2 branches. Now, obviously on opposite growers, that's going to be very, very easy. On alternate growers, it's going to be a little more difficult. You've got to actually hunt down things at different levels and take out the meat in between. But you still need to always be fighting to put your wound in between 2 branches. I don't want to give away too much from the other program. So. Okay, so the longevity of a tree in mochikomi. So bonsai and its appreciation are deeply rooted in the concept of wabi-sabi. Obviously, that philosophy represents an appreciation found in the beauty of impermanence, imperfection, and incompleteness. So everything in bonsai, not even just bonsai, but any art that explores the philosophy of wabi-sabi is looking to explore the 3 I's. Why is everything in life impermanent, imperfect, and incomplete? So bonsai aren't going to last forever. A lot of them aren't. You're going to lose a lot of bonsai, hopefully when we're long gone, but bonsai are going to pass away. The best bonsai are the ones that live to be very, very old. Those are the most prized. So if you go to Japan, more than anything else, the age of the tree is what dictates the price. How old are those trees? Very, very old trees are very valuable. It isn't easy to grow for 100 years, and many won't make it that far, so we heavily prize the ones that do. Large pruning wounds or chops removed from the trunk typically devalue a specimen substantially as the longevity of the tree is potentially compromised. So we basically already went over a lot of this stuff. Mochikomi. So has anybody ever heard that term, mochikomi? So mochikomi is true maturity on a bonsai. And so a bonsai isn't, if we were in Japan, they wouldn't be happy with just, hey, you ramified a great tree, you made a great design, that's awesome. That's not done. That's not even close to being a real bonsai yet. A real bonsai is when all your handiwork, all your wounds, all your pruning cuts, all your little carving tool marks, everything has washed away with time. Where the bark that sits on this branch is the same bark that sits on the trunk. So if we see a pine tree, and you're looking at a pine tree, all those fine branches should have bark on them. Not just heavy bark on the trunk and then young little twiggy branches. Doesn't make any sense. So mochikomi. Okay, so we already talked about this. So I have things in the PowerPoint. I just didn't know when they were coming in. But this is essentially what we were talking about with the silhouette pruning and the dangers of it. So now this is where we need a branch, and see, this is the proper division of that branch. So how do I actually increase that? If I'm just pruning out here, I'm only ever going to get my growth out here. I've got to come in and prune here and let it grow back, and then prune here and let it grow back, and prune here and build it out 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 and so on. So the way I build trees is that changed everything. Was I subscribed to a health, development, and refinement scenario, meaning every tree that I get in, I first, before I do anything to it, I weigh the health of it. So any tree you put in front of me, I'm going to say, okay, how healthy is this? All right, I'm not going to work it today. I need to get it more healthy. And I think of health as your gas that you put in your car. So that the more health you have, the more vigor you have in the tree, the more you can do to it in bonsai. The more aggressive you can be with it. Okay? So health is first. Once I get it healthy, I go into development, and development is your largest chunks taken out of the pie. So, all right, you got to grow thick branches, right? grow it in a big pot. Don't grow it in a little pot. That's going to take 20 years. Do all your big cuts here. Do all your heavy fertilizing here. Do all your like massive anything. Do it here in development period. And then when you're finished with that and you have a tree that's roughly what you want, you refine it. And the tree is refined into getting finer branches, smaller leaves, a nice pot, etc., etc. So every tree I approach that way. So this is exactly the same as the last progression we just saw, same species of tree. It was a gift, and you might be saying, wow, what a gift. But I was actually really happy because with what we had just discussed, this is the first wound on the tree, 1 to 2. In clip and grow, when you grow trees in that way, that's the most aggravating stage of all, is that first stage. That's the stage that's going to make you question whether you want to do it this way. Because you're going to say, man, this sucks, this is boring. And the reality is, once you get past this stage, everything moves quicker. Everything goes, it's like compound interest. So you're doubling your efforts every time. So now these wounds are going to be twice as fast as this one. And then the next wounds will be twice as fast, and so on and so forth. So I cut everything back. I cleaned up all those ugly roots. Let me go back real quick and show you guys. So ugly roots, curling everywhere. Luckily with willow leaf ficus, if any of you guys have any of those, you can be extremely aggressive with them. Like there is no too far with a willow leaf ficus on initial repot. But the theory with roots, on Shohin or otherwise, is that big fat roots should be cut to be divided, and thin roots should be left alone to elongate and thicken, so that eventually everything is the same thickness is the goal. So whenever you're looking at your roots, you should be pruning your big roots and leaving your long, skinny roots. So you see it recovered just fine. They always seem to do. Always seem to recover fine. So after a few months, tree is recovered and the proper branches and buds selected. So you can see this is what I mean by taking out 2. So this is where I grew 2, 1, 2, and then I took this chunk out. And so you can see now I've healed that wound. And this was in not even a year's time, I think. I don't know if I time-stamped it in here, but I think it's in under a year that I'm healing these things. Yeah, by year end, I'm already healing big wounds that on that other tree, I never, since 2012, I've made no progress with. So a big part of this is going to be, if you put something in a bonsai pot and you're keeping it pruned, especially a Shohin, that's going to be what you have. It's not going to change. So this one's a good one. We're going to get deep into this one on Saturday, but this was a good one that we started with, growing branches out big and long, and then starting to cut things back very, very hard, and starting to divide these branches 1 to 2 to 4 to 8. So you can see this is where I basically took out the middle, and I'm starting to grow this as a double. This is a double. This is now already divided to 4. And then I continued to refine it. And so this one took about from 2019 to, I finished the tree in 2023, I think, or 2022. So it took about 4 years to make. But this started as a cutting, and then we move on to further refinement. So this is all stuff that I grew off of other trees for free. I got this stuff for free. And then slowly, you can see, I didn't put it in a nice pot. Here, it's still just in a training pot, because I'm still just kind of developing up, is this worth it yet? Is it worth putting it in a nice pot yet? And then at that point, I say, yes, it is. It's good to put into a finished show container and finish my refinement. Refinement will last the rest of life. There's no end to refinement. What there is an end to is the development. And we were just having this conversation at dinner, is the most fun that I have in bonsai now, I've realized, is in the journey, is in the building of the tree. And once you get to this stage, yeah, I love this tree. I don't want to sell it out of like some weird attachment I have to it, but ultimately I don't get as much fun out of this tree as I do out of my stuff that's in development. You know? So every spring I basically defoliate and cut it back to increase division. So now this is one you guys can use aptly. This is going to be your theory for junipers going forward for all Shohin. And this will give you kind of a taste of what Shohin culture is. But John and I were talking at dinner about some of the ways that the Japanese focus on bonsai. And the Japanese, they're not looking to be original. They're not saying, hey, I've got to reinvent the wheel. They have an algorithm that they follow when they're working with a type of tree, and they follow it. And every tree is going to roughly turn out looking similar. So the algorithm with deadwood trees, junipers, buttonwoods, anything that's going to hold deadwood is going to be as follows. You twist the cutting, whatever cutting you have, you twist everything on the cutting. So this is twisted, and you're not really putting any thought into the twist. You shouldn't just make a corkscrew. You should make all these different movements. And then you allow that cutting to grow to about an inch or maybe 3/4 of an inch thick. You then start to create jin out of half of it, and you start to create shari to the front and to the back of the tree, and then you wire out your little triangle. And that's literally textbook juniper work on all of them, everything. So you're going to see how we do it on this guy. We're already at the point where we have a wired cutting that's already been grown thick. So the first thing I do, obviously I can't do all my work at one time. I just get rid of a lot of branches I know I'm not going to need, and I start opening up one shari to the front and one shari to the back that you can't see. But that one to the back is actually here because once you put the twist, if I have a twisting trunk and I start on the front, well, it's going to end up on the back. And then the one on the back is going to twist around to the front. So you get a lot of this like intertwining play between the two life veins that you're creating. Life vein 1, life vein 2. Okay? So I also, if you look back at this slide, do I have a better picture? Okay. So you see this section here, especially there, does not have the equal amount of interest as this section here. Okay? Here to here is much more interesting than here to here. And so my job as a bonsai artist or grower is to pick up where the tree lost interest. I got to cut it to where, or whatever I got to do, cut it or gin it or whatever, make it interesting, and bring it back to where I can regrow the similar interest that's on the tree further in. So I do. I wire 2 branches. Like I said, I'm building everything with 2s, and I slowly start to build out the tree. And so you see after about a month or so, things are starting to grow and get longer. And as they start to grow and get longer, I compress those coils. So I don't put all my movement into the tree at one time. A lot of times I'll put as much movement as I feel I can, and then come back a week or 2 later and put more, come back a week or 2 later and put more until that branch is right where I want it. And so here's where the shari is nearly complete. This is about 1 year in. So we're about 1 year at this point, and you can see one pruning. I didn't prune those 2 branches for close to a year, and as soon as I prune them, they divide to all the branches I need. Because they're so full of energy that they're going to push out like a hose that has the pressure turned on really high. As soon as you open it up, it's just going to shoot out everywhere. Up close of that shari. But this really shows you that work. So the shari to the front, and then the one from the back comes in and becomes that one. And I'm even going to end up shariing the branches. See? So I even end up putting shari onto these branches. And now this is what I mean by balancing the tree. So now I'm not pruning this as a silhouette yet. I will eventually prune it as a silhouette, but right now you see these need to get stronger. The lowest part of the tree is always the weakest. So I'm still working on getting this to be nice and vigorous. And once it is, then I'll start treating it as one plant. Everything I'll start reducing the leaf size and treating it all the same. But the job's never done. With a deadwood plant, you're always evolving the tree. With your junipers, see how wide this is, how big this canopy is? It's way too big to be sustained by that small trunk. So I go ahead and I gin this top portion again. And eventually, this will get too big, and I'll have to gin something else. And I'll have to continually work to keep that compressed. So So Shohin have fewer branches, so careful selection of branches is important. Branches emerging from or at soil level are acceptable. You don't want them. You don't want to have a branch right here growing out of soil level. But in a Shohin, we were talking about earlier, you might not get another branch any better. A lot of times we'll work with it. Typically a strong taper ratio in both trunks and branches is desired. This taper ratio is most typically 6 to 1, meaning that however wide, if the tree is 1 inch wide, it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches tall. That's it. So 1 inch wide, thick, 6 inches tall. That's it, and it has to taper to that height. Traditionally, informal and semi-cascade are the styles that are most common and complement the Shohin feel. So 99% of the Shohin you're going to see are going to be informal uprights or semi-cascades. You never see forests, you don't see windswept, you don't see bunjin a lot. You don't see anything that doesn't go in those cabinets. Doesn't fit in the cabinet, they don't really grow them. Because in Japan, what's the point? What would be, they're big on the display part of it, and if they're not going to be able to display it, then why grow it? So clump and broom style are also commonly seen, somewhat, like the 1%. Contemporary designs range from African style to windswept and bunjin, with limitations placed only on the size and imagination. So realistically, the only thing that's limiting your display is whether you want to be traditional Japanese or not. If you're not going to play by the box rule set, then do whatever you want. You know, you really don't even have the size constraints. So Shohin containers. As in all bonsai, drainage is most important when selecting a container. But with Shohin, you want to be expressive with your container. There's almost, dare I say, not a too loud container for Shohin. Whereas for larger trees, we want to stay harmonious with the tree. We want to be very, very subservient to the tree and have the tree be dominant. In this situation, it's not always the case. Sometimes the pot is dominant. Sometimes the pot is the focal point of the display. So pots are also for Shohin are super bright. So you want bright colors, painted landscapes, vibrant reds, all that stuff. The pot should be in harmony with the tree and composition as a whole. And special horticultural considerations should be made due to the small soil mass. Like you might need to place these in a tray of sand or double pot them or keep them in the shade, or depending on the size of the pot, you've got to come up with ways to make them happy. Okay, very small pots. So, but think about it like this. Shohin potters, if you're a potter, the bigger the pot, the riskier it is to fire it. So if I'm a potter and I'm making big pots, that's super risky every time I fire it. I got a lot on the line. So are you going to sit there and hand paint a giant pot for months and then risk firing it? You'll never get your money back. For the amount of money that you'll need to charge for it, no one will buy it. So what my point that I'm getting at is that these potters reserve their most experimental skills for the small pots. Their craziest stuff that they can do, they're doing with the small pots because they can safely get it through the firing and it's not a waste of time. So you'll see a lot of stuff like this is like 7 different glazes just layered on top of one another and fired so many times. You wouldn't do that with a big pot. You'd definitely break it. So this is a good example of kind of blending, doing a loud pot that blends well with the tree. So you see we've got bright red with a nice like kind of cream off to the side that blends with the white bark and the red leaf of the tree. Nail carved pots. So this was carved with a nail to make the scene. You don't typically see that on larger pots. Painted pots. This is a glazed and a painted pot, but you see the ombre tone of it also tends to go with the ombre tone on the leaves, the underside, that's a little different tone. This is another painted pot. So a little bit about Shohin display. Shohin are typically displayed in compositions of 2 or more trees. Often a formal, less eccentric tree sits at the top of the display, typically a pine or juniper. So if we go back and we look, every single one of these display cards that we've seen with the cabinet, you're always going to see a pine at the top, always. If it's in Japan, you're always going to see a pine. Can anyone guess why it's always a pine? That's one thing that has been said a lot, and but that's not the ultimate reason. It's a good reason. It's not the ultimate reason. Do you know? 100%. It's the king of bonsai. So it's considered the patriarch of bonsai. And what they mean by that is that it's the longest studied subject in bonsai. So they started with black pines. It's been cultivated longer than anything. And so that's considered the king. The king, always, under all circumstances. So what do we do if we're in an area where we don't grow black pines? Well, everywhere does. But what if we don't have a lot of pines? Or we don't own a black pine? You put a tree of similar reverence. So for us in Florida, bald cypress and buttonwoods are trees that we hold to high esteem, so we place them at the top. Trees should be all different species, varying in color, texture, and shape. So this is what we were talking about earlier. Is every single species, every single tree needs to be a different species. Yes. Pots should also vary in color, shape, and design. So you can't even have the same shaped pot, technically, or you shouldn't, or it's repetitive. All trees should have a stand as well. So if you look at these trees, not only are they in the box stand, but there's also a sub-stand as well. Directional trees should be ideally made to be used from the front or back to increase versatility. So what is a directional tree? A directional tree is something that's going to move the direction of your eye when looking at the display. So like this is a directional tree, this is a directional tree. Now what happens in Shohin display is I might really, really, really want to use this tree, but it might only match with all the other trees if it goes the other direction. And so if you have one that can be used, like where the front's ambiguous and it can be used from either side, those are really good trees for Shohin display. Really, really good. Oh, sorry. Display should also have a flow or rhythm. Typically, the flow is circular and continuous, although variation does exist amongst practitioners. But you see, it's like as we work our way out to the assistant pushes us back over here, and then that pulls us up into here, and we continue on and on and on. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? No? Yeah.
I was wondering if you could get a brand new tree that needs to be worked on.
Yeah.
How do you look at it and say, this tree needs to look like this? How do you have that vision?
Well, so that's one of the things we were also talking about over dinner is, at this point I've developed a good vision of like, I know how things are going to work out, mostly. But in reality is like, especially if you're doing it in the Japanese way of doing it, is you're following an algorithm. You're trusting the process. So you won't always know. You won't always 100% know how it's going to get there. You got to trust the math. Like you almost like, there's times where I'm looking at a trunk that's got 2 branches on it. I'm like, how is that going to look like anything? But then one of the branches thickens into a trunk line. The other branch starts dividing into the first branch. And you start to see a tree start to take shape. And then your next move is kind of guided for you. You see what I'm saying? So it's not always, when we're so early on, it's so ambiguous. It can go so many different directions at that point that you really, that's probably might even be the hardest place to start for a beginner. You know? It's a lot easier to do bonsai in the way that it's kind of practiced in Japan, to go and buy something that's already old and to refine it. And that's how it's kind of practiced over there. Nobody in Japan is buying a cutting and growing a cutting, because they don't have to. They have like hundreds of years of material. So, old material. So they just go, we were talking about it earlier too, you want an old gardenia, you have 50-year-old gardenia, here's $75, give me my 50-year-old gardenia, and you're wiring that out. So it's hard to kind of get that sense of working with young trees. But something Eric always taught me that really helped was I used to ask him, how do you know where to cut these trees? How do you know where to cut them? And he said, I cut them where they lack movement or taper. So you have, think about it like this. If you don't have deadwood on the tree or anything like that, then you have two ways to make the line interesting. So on the tree that we're making a line. So you have two ways to make that line interesting. That line can either taper or that line can move. That line can do both, but it has to do one or the other, or it's boring. Nobody in here, if I drew two lines, if I painted two lines, and I painted one like this and one like this, and I asked everyone in the room which one's more interesting, highly doubt anyone would be like, I really like the straight line that doesn't do anything. It's just peaceful. You know, most people like the dynamicism. They would say that there's more interest in the change of states. You know, so typically it's seen as an objective interest. The movement is objectively more interesting. So that's one of the things, is you cut where it lacks movement and taper. And that's a lot of times what I do on these trees, like when we go back, sorry, that's right in here. So this guy, really, like where do I decide to cut this guy? How do I decide to cut this guy? Is if I'm going, we have movement, whoa, we have movement, we almost lost it, almost had to cut. Nope, we have movement again. No taper, no movement, we got to cut there. You know, that's the area where it ends. So that's where you've got to pick up the pace. So I already know that my buds are here and here. I can see them on the tree. So I'm lucky this time that I'm going to cut and take that section out. But a lot of times you just have to, especially with tropicals, is you have to take you have to cut a little high and hope that it buds somewhere close to where you want it. You know, things like elms, stuff like that, that are very, very hardy trees. I wouldn't do that obviously to a juniper. You want to treat those much, much differently. Boxwoods, things that aren't as hardy, but a lot of our trees we can be very aggressive with, especially early on. Because that's what we were talking about with the health development and refinement thing, is that if a tree is super healthy, if you do something very drastic to it, odds are it's going to survive if it's super healthy. If it's like if it's growing 2 leaves a month and you barely see it moving, that's not a great tree to wrap with raffia and twist into a pretzel. You know, it's not going to like it. So you typically need to read the tree and read the vigor of the tree before applying said techniques to it. Okay? No questions so far? So this is a 2-tree display. So 2-tree display by Morton Albeck. You can see 2-tree displays are typically the only times, well, I shouldn't say the only time. Outside of the box stand, you will use scrolls with your display. So this is the only time you will not use a scroll, is when using the box stand. Every other time when displaying, you'll always have 3 elements, just like anything else. So you'll have your main tree, or your sub-tree or assistant, and then your scroll and your assistant's assistant. And so this basically is a great scroll, this little spinning top that kind of plays well with that spinning, I don't know what that tree is, Cotoneaster or something. And so here's just a few trees that I've grown under that kind of, under this process. Because again, I've grown trees one way for about 8 years, and then I grew them another way for the second 8 years. So it was almost like a rebirth. And so this is kind of how I've been growing things now, is this semi-clip and grow style. So this is an exposed root that I grew. Made this from cutting. This took me 2 years to make, from nothing. That's another one. This is a totally different one that I've made. So see, this isn't even the same tree. Totally different one, same thing. These are so cookie cutter at this point by following the algorithm that this is a 2-year project every time I want to do it. Sea hibiscus. So these are usually trees that have very big leaves. You know, they're getting frisbee sized or bigger, and slowly working them down to smaller and smaller sizes. And this is a Mame sea hibiscus. Now this is one that I don't even use wire a lot of times anymore. That's what true clip and grow is clip and grow is not the hedge pruning, and that's what we're going to talk about a lot in the coming days. We're going to dive into it. But it's about growing proportion to the branch, then pruning it and dividing the branch and continuing on. So you see this tree's been cut here and healed, cut here and healed, cut here and healed, cut here and healed. There's been a lot of cuts and then had it healed to make this little chunky guy in 1 year's time. So 1 year's time to make this fat, I mean, he's only this tall, but you know, I chopped him probably 6 times to get him to look like that. Buttonwood, and then finally another willow leaf ficus. So, any questions on what we just discussed? No? I have, and they're usually shown as, I actually have a picture of one in another program that I can bring up. They're usually one of the only shown that are shown by themselves. So, but they're also up to 10 inches. So they're a little bit taller. They're almost like Kifu size. And they're typically shown with an accent and a scroll, but all by themselves. But, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I noticed, you growing these things very quickly, of course you grow year round.
Yep.
Given our weather up here, something like buttonwood does very well during the summer.
And then peters out.
And then, well, even in the greenhouses.
No, they don't like it.
The lower light level.
Yes.
So what, and actually, a lot of the other varieties of ficus just kind of sit place during winter. How would you modify the progression, to take advantage of, or to not take advantage, but to live with? That you have maybe a 6-month growing period.
It does make it harder, and it does extend it. But it is still like the same kind of process. Is like, again, we are still making like Shohin trees. So if like I'm working with an elm tree, or let's say I'm working with even a pine, I've done a lot of this similar kind of branching, similar 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, but I don't enact it until maybe the branching, or maybe the secondary branching, or something like that. Maybe I will settle for the trunk that I have and not be as aggressive, you know what I'm saying, and start working the development into the branching itself. So like pine trees, I'm not gonna always cut them back to 2 buds. I'm usually gonna cut them back to 5 or something like that, and then whittle down to 2 later. And so that's one adjustment that I'll make based off of a shorter grow season and based off of the health of the tree. As far as speeding it up, this is the real key to the crux of it all, is thinking of it as how to be most efficient with the time that you have. So if you're growing in a small pot, up pot, get it in a bigger pot. If you're using organic fertilizer, use synthetic for the development period, for that time where you're trying to grow fast. If you're pruning frequently, start pruning only selectively, only to remove stuff that's not growing and thickening your line. And doing all of this stuff, I mean, that's really, 2 years is even fast for Florida. 2 years is insane for Florida. But what I've learned in these years is that it's a lot of choosing the efficient path. And it's not always the best. Moving fast isn't always like the bee's knees. It's just people in Florida want that. People in Florida, we have a lot of retirees. We have a lot of elderly people in bonsai as well. And they don't want to wait 5 to 10 years. They don't. And so, well, that's what they're always saying, and so they want to move quick. And so my whole idea behind these programs is about displaying like that we tend to want to have our cake and eat it too. So we tend to say, okay, well, I want to move fast and I want to progress the trees quick, but I also want them to look like bonsai. Well, you can't. That can't happen. You can't have them looking like bonsai and grow them fast. So if you want the fastest path from point A to point B, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly. It's not going to look like a bonsai. It's going to look like a tree. Is that a robbery? Yeah. No. No, I just honestly didn't have enough. I just didn't know how long to make the slideshow. There's like 70 slides already on there, so I was like, man, is this too much? But, so I didn't know. But bougainvillea, no, I love them. They work great. And one of the things is like bougainvillea have a nasty reputation for not healing. They're said to be poor healers, and they are. But if you're growing them from cutting and you're doing the branch by branch placement, two things can't occupy the same space. So if I have a wound in between two branches and this collar grows to 50% and this collar grows to 50%, well, they're going to meet in the middle and the wound's going to be gone. It's going to be swallowed up, regardless of the species of tree. You know, it's just physics. You can't occupy the same space. Now, I can't promise you it's not going to take forever to thicken them and get them to that size, but the reality is if you're patient, you do it, you have the best bougainvillea in the world. And guys in Taiwan, you'll see these beautiful pictures of these shows in Taiwan with these amazing bougainvillea that are as thick as my waist and they don't have a wound on them. And that's somebody's life work. You know, that's somebody who, they started doing what we're talking about, this algorithm, early on in their life, and they worked on that tree for 30 years, and now they're like, hey, look at this, bogey, perfect bogey. And I mean, it's hard to argue with that. You know, 30 years of like, okay, chop it now. Okay, chop it now. That's a lot. So
we have three trees from you to choose.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, let me go take a look. Ooh, that's a nice one too. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that'll work. All right.
We will be wrapping this tree off at the end of the demonstration.
Okay. All right. So crepes are a good example of, and crepes are an anomaly. Okay, crepes and trident maples and stewardia and a few other things tend to be better healers than a lot of the other trees we'll work with. So they're one of the rare trees where you don't have to have two branches to heal the wound. You can heal wounds with one branch. I don't know how it works. I have no idea. I don't know if it has to do with them being so aggressive to prepare for a winter in case there's a wound or what. But the way the tissue grows over wounds on crepes is way different than it grows over on like a ficus. So on a ficus, one of the problems is if like I was saying earlier, is if I cut and I'm looking to go 1 to 2 to 4 to 8, and I cut and I make a wound and I get one branch, well, now I have to grow the same size branch again and recut it, and now I made no progress, because for me to heal the first wound, I had to grow a big fat log, and then I have to cut that big fat log again. So I have another wound again. So you have to divide the branches to 2, except when you're on a crepe or a trident. So one of the first things I'm going to do, I don't even really necessarily have to find the front of the tree yet. I go with a basic thinning everything down to 2s. So at this point, I would just go in anywhere where there's triples or quadruples or 5s. I got to go through and I got to logically think about each juncture, and I've got to make my decisions on what I'm keeping and what I'm removing. So with that said, let me get one more tool. Yes, it is. It's definitely not a standard. This has got to be like a, might be, or isn't there one called like Poconoke or something? I know there. What is it? Pocomoke, that's it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to start working my way up. And you see the first juncture I get to, we have a nice divide. But then as soon as we get into here, we've already got a cluster of like 5 or 6 branches that are growing from one point. So I'm going to get rid of a lot of these guys. And what I'm looking for is I'm trying to make an approximation of branches that are in a V at 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. So I want this. I don't want the branches to be like this. I don't want the branches to be like this. I don't want them to be like this. I want them to be like this. Now, the bad thing about that is that, like, if something happens, like if I cut a branch and it gives me this perfect V, and for some reason I mess that perfect V up, it will push again, but it's not going to push another V. It's going to push one of these. And then if that gets messed up, then you push one of these. And so a lot of times if you mess up that first fork, you got to just take that whole inner node out and start again from the one below. Okay. All right. So now working our way up from the trunk, I'm going to keep going up. I'll probably stick with, let's actually start down here. And again, I'm going out and I hit my first problem again. 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to get rid of this guy. Whoops. And this guy. And then I know I'm also going to cut back anything I see that doesn't taper and doesn't have movement to it. And this is just a preliminary cut. That's my first cut. So now move to this section and double check this. Let's go out onto here. And I'm not making my final cuts yet, I'm just doing my cleaning cuts. So I don't even need to know my front yet. I just need to know that I can't have branches sharing a space. Okay, a lot of that's going to get cut off. And anything that lacks movement and taper, we're just going to cut off to save ourselves some time. That obviously can't be that long. This can't be that long. Ah, here's another one, another triple. 1, 2. 1, 2 with the third in the middle. So we'll take that middle guy out. The middle guy is almost always the target because it perpetuates the straight line. So if you're trying to make an interesting pattern, the middle one's always kind of just continuing on that boring straight line. So if you can break that up at numerous times, then that helps us out greatly. Okay. So then as I start to work the tree back, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it's like to there. No, I'm kidding. We're not going to go that aggressive, but... Let's shorten this guy. And if you're scared, or I shouldn't say if you're scared, if you're hesitant to make cuts like deadhead cuts, you don't want to cut where there's no leaves, what you can do is chase things back. So if, for say, if this was my branch again, and I don't want to cut here because I'm nervous about that, and I'm not sure how the tree is going to respond, or let's say you're even working material you've never worked with before. Let's say the material is brand new to you. Well, then you want to kind of chase it to the last set of green that you have. So the only way I can compress this down and squeeze it in, I can't, in theory, if I don't know anything about the tree, I don't want to go any further than the last set of green. So I'll cut back to something like that. I still have a little green on there, and so as long as it survives, it should push behind there, and I'll get another opportunity to chase that shoot back. So that's how you would kind of work on things like pines and boxwoods and things that are very fussy that you can't cut dead, you can't deadhead. So you're always chasing them back. But with a crepe, we can definitely deadhead them, and they're okay. Oh yeah, yeah. No, they definitely do. They come right back. They're aggressive growers, and aggressive healers, like I said. So that's a lot of good traits to them. I tend to take my cuts very inward, especially if I'm big on healing for most species, not all species. Things like Japanese maple, I might even make a convex cut. Azalea, I might make a convex cut. These guys, crepes, I dig in. I dig in pretty good, and I remove a good amount of tissue. Okay. All right, so for me, that's about, I'm not saying this isn't where we're done, but this is about where the algorithm takes us, where now we can start making some decisions. Now I can start acting on the tree and saying, what do I like, what don't I like about this? What do I want to be my front? How do I want this to be perceived? So I have some leeway at this stage. Think of it, before this, you really don't have a lot of say. You should just trust the math. But here, I do have some leeway. Get rid of that. And always think when you're making your first cuts, like if you need to make a big cut, make the big cut and just do it early on and put all that time going forward into healing that wound rather than kind of saying, man, I don't know if I should get rid of that. I don't know. It's time is a ticking. It's always ticking. All right. Shorten this guy a little bit. Any questions so far? Any questions about Florida alligators? Oh yeah. I mean, let me rephrase that. I don't know that it can take a winter outside. I do know it can take a freeze. You know, it can take a pretty good freeze. So they have them up in, all through Georgia and stuff like that, Texas, Louisiana. So,
You're not talking about that in crepe myrtle?
Crepe myrtle in general.
Crepe myrtle in general, it's just there are a number of them that are borderline zone 5, zone 6, and that's what we tend to that.
What are your zone 6?
In and outside,
Yeah.
every winter in a cold house.
Perfect.
This come from you guys? Oh, okay.
Yeah, these are beautiful. So these will be fine outside. Would they be fine outside of a cold frame?
In a cold frame.
In the cold frame.
Yeah. I've got those new Bellinis that'll be fine.
That's cool.
They're zone 5. I don't know how they did it.
What zone is this up here?
6.
6. We were in 9. We were in 9B. Now I think we're like 9C or something. We keep getting hotter. The lower, it just means it's hotter. It just means we're more tropical, heading more towards the tropics. It used to be that where I was at was considered subtropical, but now they consider it tropical. Now we got iguanas everywhere, and yeah, it's weird. They do. They fall out of the trees sometimes just because they're not smart, But they are cute. I do like them. All right, we're gonna make some good cuts. Okay. Yeah. Sure. No, it's soil level. Soil level up. Yep. Nope. Nothing like that. I usually, luckily, not everybody's going to have the same size hand, but I do tend to have roughly 8 inches there, and so I go about like that. I was doing that the other day, and I had one of my students come up, and she's like the small lady, and she's like, puts her hand up, and it's like half the size. I'm like, yeah, that's not a Shohin. That's not a Shohin. Well, I need to come up with a better scale. Cascade is still measured it's still measured, like the canopy still needs to be 8 inches down. Like ultimately what we're trying to achieve is, where's this thing? I'll show you. Here we go. Okay. So you see how each tree has about 3 to 4 inches of negative space above it as well? So you have to have enough negative space when you're sitting in the cabinet as well that it doesn't look like it's cramped in there. And so even a Cascade still has the same kind of size constraints because it's still going to need to have that same surrounding surface area.
So
So are the cabinets fairly standardized in their size?
They have a max size. They don't have a minimum size. I've seen them small, 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 but there is a max, because think your max display area is 72 inches. So there's a max size to fit both those elements. You think like a traditional large tree, we'd have your large tree, you'd have your scroll, and your accent. And so with the Shohin display, you have your big cabinet, which represents your large tree, and then your assistant that represents kind of your accent. Okay, so you're taking up that same 72-inch area, but you're taking it up with a bunch of small trees. Coming at them with numbers.
So those four spaces, are those?
Oh,
Are those
I think-
the same size?
yes, roughly. I mean, yeah, roughly. Like this is a pretty standard divide. This isn't usually larger or anything like that. But there are different styles. There's a lot of different styles of these Shohin displays. Like this is a very traditional one. There are some where there's no barrier here. There are some where there's no middle stage, where it's just 1, 2, 3. There's some where there's just a flat middle stage. No, there aren't, not flat. What's the other one I've seen? Seen this one?
Just take the top.
The top down, I've seen it like that, where the top is just this, yeah, exactly, top layer off.
It's just like the bottom and.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is the top, and then this is the bottom. I've seen that. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of different styles, but they're typically pretty symmetrical how they're built. Yeah, so you see that's about 8 inches or so. That's a little bigger. That was a bigger tree than a Shohin, though. That was like a Kifu. All right. Okay, so we're just about done. So now, realistically, what I do have to do to make it Shohin is I have to be more aggressive. Now, could I have left it longer and made it a good tree? Absolutely. But if we're trying to make it under Shohin 6-to-1 ratio, we have to cut it back harder and regrow it. So that means coming back to here minimum and here minimum. And I would say that'll probably actually be okay to start with. But let's talk about this. I'll also cut paste this big wound. I'm probably going to work with, for now, something like this as my front, unless you want to take this off and make this the line, which I ultimately think is what we should do. It's just a big loss, but let's go ahead and do it. I need to take that off. Let me check that line. Yeah. Right? There we go. Nice cuts. Good cut. Okay. So now one more cut to make, I think. That's the problem with Shohin, is they keep getting smaller. You know? Now this last one, I am going to take this guy back. I might even just remove him. Let's see. No, we can just cut him back and see what happens. So there we go. So that's our line for the Shohin there. And think all bonsai, the way I've always learned bonsai is we're not growing topiary, we're not growing poodles or anything like that. We're growing a sculpture, like it's all sculpture. And the foliage is your payoff. So the foliage, you're gonna change it out 8 million times. So a lot of people, they tend to like gravitate towards the foliage. Like, when am I gonna get small leaves? When am I gonna get this? To me now, I don't even care about the leaves. It's all about the line. And building a good line that tapers well and has realistic math, realistic proportion. And so that's what I think makes a good tree now, more so than anything else. So any questions on this guy? Do we have any cut paste, or we can just do it later?
I got some in the car.
You do? Okay, cool.
I just find it funny that you spent all that time, looking at the trees and cut out the middle, and then you ended up cutting them all off anyway.
Yeah, but also I could have just cut it back to this, but the reality is when I'm at home, I do still take it to, you're not always going to have something that's so clear cut like that. Like a lot of times you might be working on something collected, and the process is still first clear it out, Like if I have a juniper or anything, it's first clear it out, see how it looks. Maybe we would have saw something that said, you know what, this tree's so good as a larger tree, we shouldn't make it a Shohin. And so you might see options that change your original plan by going through and kind of cleaning it out. So I'm still a big advocate of going through the motions and just doing the same work over and over and over, going and cleaning it out. Now, if the tree's this big, and I know I'm looking for something in here, and I can see that there's long straight areas, then I'll get rid of it. But you saw like a lot of those areas still tapered, and we could have still made a good tree out to here. Like that, we could have made a good tree out to there. And we could have made a good tree leaving this. That could have been fine too, but it wouldn't have been a Shohin. So I was debating on whether we should finish with it actually being a true Shohin, or whether we should kind of just talk about making a good tree, and I decided we should just go with the Shohin. But, yeah. Yep. So any other questions on that? They do. Yep, I hope so. Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, you should get a lot of them. Now, most trees will do that when you cut them back this hard. Yeah, they'll pop up from the ground and everything like that. He should shoot out everywhere. But you will need to select. So the theory is like you might end up with a branch. I think crepes are opposite. So no, these will come out like right in pairs. But if you're working with an alternate grower, you might end up with a branch where you end up selecting one's much higher than the other one. And that's where you have to just scoop it out in between those and angle cut it between them and start to grow the one to heal half that and the one to heal the other half and start to build it out that way. But I have in my toolkit like kind of a wired out version of what a Japanese pad is supposed to look like. But we'll talk about that tomorrow, or sorry, Saturday. We'll talk about it Saturday and really dive into kind of pad structure and stuff like that. Because that's really the 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 is everything in bonsai, 100%. Every style, everything. So like the way you saw me thin it out, that's literally everything. Even the junipers, even the super dense, like super daunting junipers, once you kind of break them down and you start thinning that out, it becomes way easier. Once you kind of see it thin, you're like, oh, that's not that hard and intimidating. And so it's just doing that work.
Talk a little bit about the next step in the process of this tree for next year. We're going to be putting this in a cold frame or a garage over the winter.
Yeah, they said
spring is when they're going to start to bud back. Where do we go from there?
So in spring, you're going to basically see a bunch of buds. What we're hoping for is we're looking to see 2 buds on this side that are going to come out. And if they're shooting straight up, you're going to wire them out horizontal. So remember, this is our front. So we need to start getting a branch here on this side. Let me cut this off because it's a good little explainer branch. So we need to get a branch out here off of this guy, like that. We need to get a branch off of this guy, like that. This branch needs to thicken, like that. Ideally, we need something here. If something emerged from there, I would take something there. So these stubs that I left, I'm looking to ideally create 2 branches. I'm only showing 1, so let me prune it a little tighter. There we go. The 2, like that. See, like that? So I'm looking to take my next stage. So think the way I build bonsai is, again, very algorithmic. And so it's very easy for me to know the work that I need to do. Is 1 branch, I know that needs to be 2 branches. So I need to get it to there, and then I know my next work will be turning these 2 branches into 4 branches. You know, so I'll always know that my next work lies in checking where I'm at on the branch theory. So looking to make a flat pad and starting to add the next stage to the design. So does that kind of make sense to everybody? Just all of these single branches need to double and turn into 2.
So the 2 to 4 to 8, does that happen each year?
No, it'll happen honestly because these are several flushes per year. You'll probably get 2 or 3 stages depending on like how fast it grows and how critical you are on thickness. You can get several stages in a year. You know, you can and work your tree out. It really only takes to get like fine branching and stuff like that. It takes about 2 years to build out the branching of a tree. It takes roughly about 2 years. What I will say takes the longest is building a good trunk. building a good trunk and good primary branches and stuff like that. So, what else was I going to say about that? 2 branches. We want to heal, we want to paste the wounds. 2 branches. We also want to probably repot it into bonsai soil. So in the springtime, I wouldn't leave it in this soil forever. I wouldn't put it in a small bonsai pot. But ideally, in a perfect world, if money was no issue, money no issue at all, I would take a pot like this and fill it with a coarse bonsai mix with no akadama, none. And I would pot this into a coarse mix. Maybe even just pot it in straight pumice, you know, for the first few years. Because akadama slows things down. It's great, I love akadama, but it's useful for later stages of bonsai development. So when you want small leaves and you want the tree to not budge, when you're like, man, I just spent 5 years making this tree and it's perfect, I don't want it to move, that's when you put akadama in it. And that's when akadama is a refinement amendment. So it's really, really good for slowing things down and getting them in refinement. But for trying to grow explosive growth, it will really slow you down.
So what's your mix for that explosive growth?
I use, down in Florida, I typically, nowadays, I've just been using pumice, straight pumice. Or I will use the Wigert's mix, that's expanded shale, lava, and pumice. But anything coarse, anything super coarse that's inorganic. Because that's the problem with this, is you could say, oh, well, just leave it in that. It's big, it's got a lot of nutrients, but you have a 2-year shelf life on this kind of soil before it starts turning south on you. And so you're either going to have to up-pot it in more of this or dig it out and put more of this in there anyway. So you might as well just dig it out and get it over with and put it in bonsai soil, and then at least you're not bare rooting it after you've put years of work into it, you know? Because I've had issues where I've bare rooted fully ramified trees and cut a bunch of roots and then lost all my ramification. And I'm like, well, that was dumb. So we don't want to do that.
Over winter in this particular tree, I would stick it back in and I root it in.
Yeah.
Soil.
Oh, absolutely. No. Wait till spring. That's a good, and that's, yeah, we want to do our potting in spring. You can do some repottings in fall, but I would never do an initial potting in the fall. I would never do an initial potting on a deciduous tree outside of spring.
So, you were looking at the movement of trunk and branches.
Yeah.
Do you ever look at the Nabari, or?
Yeah, the Nabari is good. But you see, we have a uniform kind of Nabari, and the only thing, like, what you're trying to do is you're trying to pick your poison. You're trying to pick your best angle of approach, because, yeah, okay, maybe the Nabari is better on this side, but now I have a big wound that I'm staring at. Or maybe the Nabari is better here, but now I can't use any of the branches. So you have to almost say, okay, well, the Nabari is pretty good here, no wounds, I can use the branches, and you're kind of finding a way to find the best of all worlds. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of a mixture of everything. A mixture of everything.
We have less of a space to really look at our and showing. So it really counts on a big tree. It's pretty small in terms of what you can see.
Yeah.
In the display level.
It's true. And a lot, I mean, they used to say in the old Shohin material, they used to say you just needed a flare. You know, but now, you know, you saw the trees. Now the aesthetic is changing, and we do expect a better Nabari now, but still, a subtle flare is all you need really to convey the image.
So you repot that spring and a couple of years roll out the migrating and everything. You start reducing the roots.
I would probably start reducing the roots when I hit primary, secondaries, tertiaries. When I get to about tertiaries, so when most of my branches have kind of gone from primary, secondary, tertiary, and I'm well developed out there, that's a good time to start thinking about reducing things down. Because think we're kind of jumping into some of my program for the next couple days, but think of when we want to grow things, we want to grow things fast to slow. So like, I often ask people, they're like, well, you know, if you grow really, really fast, you're going to grow long internodes. You know, you're going to grow long internodes on the trunk. And I say, well, how many on a Shohin, how many internodes do I need on the trunk? How many branches do I need to fill this space on a Shohin? 3? 3 branches? So 3 branches in that space. So I need 1, 2, 3 nodes. So that means I don't need to worry about growing this section super slow. I don't need to spend 20 years growing something that I'm not going to use, is my point. And it wouldn't be 20 years, but I'm just illustrating a point, is I wouldn't have to wait that long. So this portion, I only need 3 nodes. So grow it fast. Grow that part fast. This is the part you need to find growth. This is the part you need to find growth. Way out here you need to find growth. So it's not going to be in the structure and the core of the tree. You know, you only need a few nodes there. So grow fast to slow. Fast to slow. Make sense? Good? Anybody else? Anybody? Thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys having me. This was a lot of fun. And thanks for letting me use your tools. Yeah, man. No, that was
Really interesting. Yeah, so I'm definitely going to be enjoying the workshops.
Awesome.
Now.
Awesome. I'm going to use the restroom.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your help setting up the computer, too. Sure. I'm going to take off the microphone. Uh-oh.
Last call for tickets.
So, Fort Myers and Cape Coral took a very big hit.
These are my pennies.